Elizabeth I, known as the Virgin Queen, ruled England from 1558 to 1603, a period often referred to as the Elizabethan era. Her reign marked a golden age of culture, exploration, and political stability in England. But who was Elizabeth I, and how did she shape the course of history? In this video, we'll explore the life, legacy, and fascinating story of one of the most iconic monarchs of all time. Elizabeth I, born on September 7, 1533, at Greenwich Palace, was the daughter of King Henry VIII and Anne Boleyn. Her birth occurred during a turbulent time when Henry VIII had severed ties with the Catholic Church to annul his marriage to Catherine of Aragon, driven by his desire for a male heir and his infatuation with Anne. Despite Elizabeth's birth positioning her as heir presumptive, her father soon grew disenchanted with and, leading to her execution for alleged treason when Elizabeth was just 2. This left Elizabeth illegitimate in the eyes of many. Her childhood was marked by political and familial upheaval as Henry married 4 more times. Elizabeth's education was exceptional. She mastered multiple languages, mathematics, and the arts, laying the foundation for her intellectual and cultural leadership. Following Henry's death in 1547, his son Edward VI briefly reigned before dying young in 1553. These early experiences of instability and peril profoundly influenced Elizabeth, shaping her into the resilient and politically astute ruler who would later unite England during her reign. During Edward VI's reign, Elizabeth lived under the wardship of her stepmother Catherine Parr, who married Thomas Seymour after Henry VIII's death. Seymour behaved inappropriately toward Elizabeth, an experience that may have influenced her aversion to marriage. Edward, a strong Protestant, attempted to exclude both Elizabeth and his Catholic sister Mary from the succession, naming Lady Jane Grey as his heir. Jane's reign lasted only 9 days before Mary, supported by Elizabeth for appearances, claimed the throne. Mary I, a devout Catholic, sought to reverse the Protestant Reformation, leading to widespread persecution of Protestants. Her unpopular marriage to Prince Philip of Spain further alienated her subjects. Elizabeth, a Protestant icon to many, became a target of suspicion, particularly during Thomas Wyatt's rebellion in 1554. Although no evidence linked Elizabeth to the uprising, she was imprisoned in the Tower of London and later held at Woodstock. Mary's reign was marked by political and personal turmoil, including a false pregnancy that foreshadowed her death in 1558. Elizabeth, spared through Philip's intervention and lacking any proof of treason, succeeded Mary. Upon receiving news of her ascension, Elizabeth declared her reign to be God's will, marking the beginning of a transformative era in English history. When Elizabeth ascended to the English throne in 1558, pressing questions loomed, particularly concerning the settlement question regarding the Church of England's stance relative to the Roman Catholic Church. England, left fractured by Mary I's tumultuous reign, sought stability. With no precedent for a successful and lasting female ruler, Empress Matilda's brief and distant rule being long forgotten, Elizabeth, at just 25 years old, had to define her role as queen. Early on, she resolved to emphasize objective measures of success over any stereotypical female imprint on leadership. Elizabeth prioritized devotion to England as a unifying force, seeking to subsume religious divisions under the banner of national identity. She strategically embodied the concept of the Virgin Queen, evoking parallels to Catholic reverence for the Virgin Mary. This transformation into a symbolic mother and protector of England rallied loyalty and helped stabilize her reign. In a 1559 address to Parliament, she declared, "This shall be for me sufficient, that a marble stone shall declare that a queen, having reigned such a time, lived and died a virgin." By embracing her unmarried status, Elizabeth not only consolidated her image but also retained diplomatic flexibility, using the prospect of marriage as a tool in foreign policy. Elizabeth's approach to religion was marked by pragmatism. At her coronation, officiated by Owen Oglethorpe, a Catholic bishop, she symbolized her intention to navigate a middle path. Although a devout Protestant, she retained elements of Catholic tradition, such as the crucifix, and minimized sermons to placate more radical reformers. The 1559 Act of Supremacy required officials to swear allegiance to her as the Church's supreme governor, while repealing Mary's heresy laws to avoid religious persecution. Meanwhile, the Act of Uniformity mandated church attendance and introduced a revised Book of Common Prayer, scaling down penalties for recusants. This delicate balancing act reflected Elizabeth's understanding of governance as a subtle art. Elizabeth's virginity became a powerful political tool. She used marriage negotiations to her advantage, entertaining proposals from suitors like Archduke Charles of Austria and the French Valois princes, while keeping her heart with Robert Dudley, Earl of Leicester. Her refusal to marry allowed her to manipulate foreign alliances and domestic factions, maintaining her autonomy and England's stability. However, Elizabeth's decision not to marry or name a successor created anxiety about England's future. After surviving a near-fatal bout of smallpox in 1563, she faced mounting pressure from Parliament to secure the succession. Elizabeth, wary of the dangers of naming an heir, let history take its course. The Tudor line ended with her, but her careful navigation ensured the peaceful accession of James VI of Scotland as James I of England, uniting the two crowns. Elizabeth's greatest challenge came from her cousin, Mary, Queen of Scots, a Catholic rival with a legitimate claim to the English throne. Mary's tumultuous reign in Scotland ended with her abdication and flight to England, where Elizabeth kept her imprisoned for nearly 19 years. Mary's presence in England spurred Catholic plots to dethrone Elizabeth, including the Rising of the North in 1569 and conspiracies involving the Duke of Norfolk. These threats intensified after Pope Pius V excommunicated Elizabeth in 1570, absolving Catholics of allegiance to her. Elizabeth responded by suppressing rebellion, executing 750 rebels, and leveraging anti-Catholic sentiment to strengthen national unity. Mary's continued involvement in plots ultimately led to her execution in 1587, removing a central threat to Elizabeth's reign. By combining pragmatism, diplomacy, and a shrewd understanding of public image, Elizabeth successfully navigated the many challenges of her era, securing her place as one of England's most iconic monarchs. During Elizabeth's reign, Parliament passed legislation in 1581 to combat the conversion of English subjects to Catholicism, making it a treasonable offence punishable by death. While Elizabeth publicly proclaimed that she did not wish to make windows into men's souls, her government, under the leadership of figures like Francis Walsingham, treated Catholic conspiracies as existential threats to her rule. Walsingham, Elizabeth's spymaster, is believed by some to have either trapped Mary, Queen of Scots, or fabricated evidence in the Babington Plot, a conspiracy to assassinate Elizabeth. Despite Elizabeth's reluctance, Mary was executed in 1587 for high treason. Elizabeth reportedly agonized over this decision, aware of the precedent it set and haunted by the memory of her mother's execution. Nevertheless, Elizabeth increasingly embraced her role as a solitary female monarch, finding wisdom in ruling without a husband. Elizabeth's final years were marked by a focus on preserving England rather than expanding its holdings. Unlike her father, Henry VIII, she lacked ambitions for continental conquest, especially after England's occupation of Le Havre ended in defeat in 1563. Her interest lay in naval power, which proved invaluable during the Anglo-Spanish War, 1585 to 1604. Elizabeth used privateers, such as Sir Francis Drake, to weaken Spanish power and enrich England. Though she officially disclaimed responsibility for their actions, Elizabeth's support for privateering, including knighting Drake, strained relations with Spain and fueled tensions that culminated in Philip II's attempted invasion. Elizabeth's engagement in European conflicts resumed in 1585 when she signed the Treaty of Nonsuch, pledging military support to Dutch Protestants resisting Spanish rule. This treaty, combined with Philip II's alliance with the French Catholic League, made England vulnerable to invasion and escalated tensions into the Anglo-Spanish War. Despite her preference for diplomacy, Elizabeth's strategic deployment of naval and military resources proved critical in defending England, particularly during the Spanish Armada's failed invasion in 1588. The war, however, persisted until 1604, after Elizabeth's death and James I's ascension. Robert Dudley, Earl of Leicester, led the English expedition to the Netherlands in Elizabeth's name, but the Queen harbored misgivings from the start. Elizabeth's strategy balanced overt military support for the Dutch with covert peace negotiations with Spain. This dual approach conflicted with Dudley's belief that Elizabeth was fully committed to the Dutch cause. Despite her explicit orders to avoid decisive confrontations, Dudley accepted the title of Governor-General from the Dutch States General, a move Elizabeth interpreted as an attempt to coerce England into assuming sovereignty over the Netherlands. Furious, Elizabeth rebuked Dudley in a letter, expressing her disappointment and commanding his immediate compliance with her orders. Meanwhile, tensions with Spain escalated following Sir Francis Drake's devastating raids on Spanish ships and ports, including his bold attack on Cadiz in 1587. These provocations led King Philip II of Spain to launch the Spanish Armada in 1588, a massive fleet intended to conquer England. The Armada, consisting of over 150 ships and 26,000 men, set sail in July, aiming to invade via the southeast coast of England. However, the Armada's campaign ended in disaster. English fireships, coupled with unfavorable weather and strategic miscalculations, devastated the Spanish fleet. Over one-third of the ships were lost, and the remnants limped back to Spain, battered and defeated. Elizabeth seized this moment to consolidate her image as a protector of her people. Dressed in a silver breastplate, she delivered her iconic speech at Tilbury on August 8, 1588, declaring, "I have the heart and stomach of a king, and of a king of England too." Her words and presence galvanized national pride, portraying her as a selfless monarch willing to share in her subjects' peril. The defeat of the Armada became a powerful symbol of divine favor and a testament to Elizabeth's leadership. Public celebrations, including a grand Thanksgiving service at St. Paul's Cathedral, reinforced her popularity and solidified the mythos surrounding her reign. Although the Armada's defeat was a significant victory, the Anglo-Spanish War continued until 1604, often favoring Spain. Despite English successes such as Drake's exploits and naval preparedness, Spain retained control of the Netherlands, maintaining a persistent threat of invasion. Critics, including Sir Walter Raleigh, argued that Elizabeth's cautious approach, characterized by half measures and small-scale invasions, missed opportunities to decisively weaken Spain's empire. Elizabeth, however, distrusted her generals, accusing them of vainglory and recklessness. This skepticism, combined with her preference for diplomacy and strategic restraint, defined her handling of the conflict. Ultimately, Elizabeth's victory over the Armada cemented her legacy as a formidable ruler. It reinforced her image as the Virgin Queen, divinely favored to lead England, a Protestant stronghold against Catholic adversaries. While the war with Spain lingered, the triumph over the Armada became a lasting emblem of Elizabeth's reign, symbolizing the resilience and unity of her people under her leadership. Elizabeth I's actions during Henry IV's ascent to the French throne in 1589 reflect her nuanced, if sometimes flawed, approach to diplomacy and military intervention. Although Philip II of Spain and the Catholic League challenged Henry's claim to the throne, Elizabeth supported the Protestant monarch to counterbalance Spain's power. However, her military campaigns in France were disastrous. Her army's expedition in 1589 ended with no tangible gains, and subsequent efforts in 1591 and 1592 fared no better due to insufficient funding and reinforcements. The campaigns failed, and Elizabeth's troops were overwhelmed by the Catholic League. Elizabeth's strained relationship with Ireland further tested her reign. As queen of a predominantly Catholic territory, she faced persistent resistance. Her strategy involved granting large estates to loyal courtiers, aiming to prevent Ireland from becoming a base for Spain or other Catholic powers. However, Irish rebellions were met with brutal scorched earth tactics, including widespread destruction and starvation. The 1580 Munster Revolt resulted in the deaths of approximately 30,000 people. While Elizabeth advocated for humane treatment of the Irish, she accepted these atrocities as necessary for maintaining control. By 1602, the Irish revolt was suppressed, but Elizabeth did not live to witness its final resolution. Elizabeth also sought pragmatic alliances to secure England's interests. Her relationship with Tsarist Russia, initiated during Edward VI's reign, proved complex. Tsar Ivan IV sought a military alliance and even proposed marriage, but Elizabeth limited their dealings to trade agreements. Following Ivan's death, his successor, Pfeffer, distanced Russia from England, rejecting proposals for a military alliance and revoking English trading privileges. Elizabeth's dealings with the Ottoman Empire exemplified her pragmatic foreign policy. She forged a commercial treaty with Sultan Murad III in 1580 and considered a joint military operation against Spain. By emphasizing shared opposition to Catholicism, Elizabeth portrayed Protestantism and Islam as ideologically aligned in rejecting idol worship, unnerving her Catholic adversaries. Despite her triumph over the Spanish Armada in 1588, Elizabeth's later years were marked by mounting internal and external challenges. Ongoing conflicts with Spain and Ireland strained the economy. War expenses, poor harvests, and rising inflation eroded the standard of living, fueling discontent. To address potential Catholic uprisings, Elizabeth intensified crackdowns on dissidents, establishing secret commissions in 1591 to root out threats. Elizabeth's declining health and age in the 1590s diminished her control over governance. Corruption spread within her administration as she delegated more authority to senior ministers. Factional rivalries, particularly between Robert Cecil and the Earl of Essex, destabilized her court. Once adept at managing her ministers, Elizabeth now struggled to maintain the unity and efficiency that characterized her earlier reign. In the final years of Elizabeth I's reign, her ability to balance external conflicts and internal governance diminished, leading to notable shifts in her strategies. With the pressures of war and the need to raise revenue, she increasingly relied on granting monopolies instead of securing subsidies through Parliament. While this approach allowed her to maintain patronage, it resulted in price fixing and public discontent. Nevertheless, her political acumen remained evident when she skillfully addressed Parliament in 1601, appealing to her subjects' loyalty and shifting blame onto unscrupulous ministers. Despite the turbulence, Elizabeth's era is celebrated for its cultural and literary flourishing. The Elizabethan age witnessed the emergence of luminaries like Edmund Spenser, Christopher Marlowe, and William Shakespeare, whose works elevated English literature to unprecedented heights. Though her patronage of the arts was not as extensive as often imagined, Elizabeth's image and legacy were immortalized in works like Spenser's The Faerie Queene, where she was depicted as the eternal Gloriana. Elizabeth's mastery of self-presentation also contributed to her enduring legacy. She overcame personal vulnerabilities, such as her hair loss from smallpox, by crafting an image of regal beauty and strength, which resonated with her subjects. Her strategic use of glamour and symbolism further solidified her as an iconic figure. Upon her death on March 24, 1603, Elizabeth left no direct heir, leading to the succession of James VI of Scotland, the son of her executed rival, Mary, Queen of Scots. This union of the English and Scottish crowns under James I marked the beginning of a new era. Elizabeth's reign, however, continued to be celebrated as a golden age of stability and achievement, shaping perceptions of English identity and imperial destiny. Elizabeth's legacy remains a complex interplay of skill, circumstance, and mythology. Contemporaries and subsequent generations alike admired her for navigating a male-dominated world with unmatched political deftness. Pope Sixtus V's remark that Elizabeth was only a woman ruling half an island, yet feared by the greatest powers of Europe, underscores her extraordinary impact. Through her 44-year reign, Elizabeth laid the foundation for England's transformation into Great Britain, setting the stage for its rise as a global superpower. As Shakespeare might suggest, her infinite variety ensured that her legacy, much like Cleopatra's, would remain timeless and captivating.